Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's George Aken lecture. My name's Alex Zakaris. I'm a professor of political science at UVM. And I'm going to start today by reading our land acknowledgement statement. The campus of the University of Vermont sits within a place of gathering and exchange, shaped by water and stewarded by ongoing generations of indigenous peoples, in particular the Western Abenaki. Acknowledging the relations between water, land, and people is in harmony with the mission of this university. Acknowledging the serious and significant impacts of our histories on indigenous peoples and their homelands is part of the university's ongoing work of teaching, research, and engagement, and an essential reminder of our past and our interconnected futures for the many of us gathered on this land. UVM respects the indigenous knowledge interwoven in this place and commits to uplifting the indigenous peoples and cultures present on this land and within our community. Before I introduce our speaker, I'm delighted to invite Dr. Marlene Tromp to the podium to offer some introductory remarks. Dr. Tromp, as you all know, is the 28th president of the University of Vermont. Before coming to UVM this past summer, she served as president of Boise State University for 6 years, as executive vice chancellor and campus provost at UC Santa Cruz, and as dean and vice provost at Arizona State University. She's also a distinguished scholar of Victorian literature and culture, so please join me in welcoming our university president.
Good afternoon. This is the 50th anniversary of the Aken Lecture, which began in 1975. Now, 1975 is in my living memory, so it doesn't seem too far away to me. But to people who are younger, it might have the flavor of something that only lives in history books or TV shows, even though they recognize that the seeds planted in that moment have become a forest today. Let me take you back there for just a moment. Senator Leahy returned from D.C., a young new senator with his colleague Mike Mansfield from Montana. The Republican and Democrat were speaking at the first Aken Lecture, which was designed to tackle several grand political questions. At that time, Democrats and Republicans were working together in the wake of the Watergate scandal to create reforms. There were also, however, serious disagreements between the parties. The Vietnam War had produced deep fault lines across the country. We saw the rise of consumer culture, the first summer blockbuster, Jaws, the opening of Space Mountain, the founding of Microsoft. And when I list these things, I'm sure you can see how each one of these has shaped the moment we inhabit right now. But I think there's even more to consider in what was a lesson to me just 2 years ago, when I visited the Military History Museum in Hanoi, Vietnam. Out in front of the museum is a ravaged American B-52 bomber, pointing tail up, shot down by local people, a jarring image to someone whose father was a working-class boy in the Army Air Corps. Of course, I knew there were more sides to the story, and even what I say now cannot capture the complexity, but it may still be worth mentioning given the subject of today's talk. The museum detailed a long history of colonial occupation by countries from across the world and ended with its recent conflict, a struggle it called the American War, a crisis understood as a violent U.S. assault. Inside, I saw things that left a profound mark on me, like the bronze statue of a very young man standing in front of a burning village entitled Dead Braving Soldier, one of the most poetic translations I've ever read. Busts of leaders flanked by rules for the Vietnamese military. Do not take from the people, do not disturb the people, respect the people, help the people, protect the people, kill the enemy to save the country, always promote a spirit of self-criticism, maintain the behavior of an exemplary person. There were portraits of weeping mothers and of children drowning in a sea of death. Estimates suggest that millions of sons and daughters may have perished. Having this story told from the perspective of personal loss shifts the ground from the binary U.S. reading, Nixon versus the pacifists, to a much more nuanced one bisected by multiple lines of meaning and belief. It challenged me to approach our current historical moment with deep humility, to consider the ethical, personal, and political impacts far beyond the boundaries that exist in the framing we typically offer to strive to deepen my own understanding. Our Aken lecture today is no less about politics and no less about a paradigm shift. Michael Sandel calls us to think anew about a framework he believes is driving us apart, intensifying our conflict. He hopes to lead us to what he has called a less rancorous and more generous worldview and form of engagement. Wouldn't Senator Leahy, who modeled such an effort 50 years ago, indeed, who had such faith and hope in another period of tumult at the first Aken lecture, be pleased to hear a meditation on that prospect? I look forward to Dr. Sandel's talk and to the challenge it will offer all of us. And I invite all of you, as we do at UVM, to think, ask questions, come to know your own mind on these complex issues in our complex world. Thank you.
So it gives me great pleasure today to introduce our speaker, Professor Michael Sandel, who's Ann T. and Robert M. Bass Professor of Government at Harvard University. Professor Sandel's career combines three different forms of excellence in a way that's very rare in academia. First, he's a leading scholar who's made seminal contributions to the fields of political theory and American political thought. When I was a graduate student, we cut our teeth on his first book, Liberalism and the Limits of Justice, which was a field-shaping intervention in the ongoing debate about the moral and philosophical foundations of liberal politics. Second, Professor Sandel is an influential public intellectual who's succeeded in engaging broad audiences, popular audiences, and inviting them to think more deeply and more critically about public affairs. His books have been translated into over 30 languages, and many of them, including The Tyranny of Merit, which he'll be discussing today, have the virtue of making difficult philosophical ideas accessible and engaging to lay readers. Many of us try to do this. It's really difficult. Professor Sandel makes it seem effortless. And third, Professor Sandel is an acclaimed teacher who has reached and inspired countless students, both at Harvard and beyond. He teaches a famous course simply called Justice in a very large amphitheater at Harvard. It's a riveting class, hugely popular among undergrads, and he teaches it in a way that's interactive, constantly stimulating, provocative. Since he made it available for free online, it's been viewed by tens of millions of people. I recommend it to you highly if you haven't had the pleasure. I've already mentioned the book that he'll be speaking about today, The Tyranny of Merit, which came out a few years ago now and has received broad critical acclaim. It was named Book of the Year by the Times Literary Supplement, Best Book of the Year by the New Statesman. It was a Bloomberg Best Book of the Year and a Guardian Best Book about Ideas for the year. I've taught it several times myself here at UVM, and it has sparked searching conversations among our own students. It offers a penetrating diagnosis of our country's current discontents. Please join me in welcoming Michael Sandel.
Thank you. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Alex. And Dr. Trump, thank you both for those generous words of welcome. It's a pleasure to be here at the university and to give the Aken lecture in honor and in memory of a distinguished public servant from the state of Vermont who really set an example for reasoned public discourse, an example that we need to be reminded of these days, because our civic life isn't going very well. What passes for public discourse consists, most of the time, in shouting matches, ideological food fights, where people shout past one another without really listening. And we see this every time we turn on, cable television, turn it on and maybe quickly turn it off. It's even worse, matters are even worse on social media, where hurling of outrageous but attention-grabbing epithets fits the business model of the social media companies that have figured how to keep us hooked, glued to our screens, scrolling and swiping, the better to yield our personal data so they can sell us stuff. It's not a pretty picture. The question I'd like to discuss with you today is how we came to be so deeply polarized and what it might take to morally invigorate the terms of public discourse. And part of my answer to the question, how did we wind up in this polarized, rancorous condition, has to do with, as Alex pointed out, the tyranny of merit, the name of a book I wrote recently. Now, to speak of merit as a kind of tyranny, I acknowledge, it seems dissonant, even provocative, because we normally think of merit as a good thing. If I need surgery, I want a well-qualified surgeon to perform it. That's merit, being well-qualified for the job. So how has merit become a kind of tyranny? Well, we can begin to see how this happened if we look back over the past 5 decades. The divide between winners and losers has been deepening, poisoning our politics, setting us apart. This has partly to do with the widening inequalities of income and wealth over the past half century. But it's not only that. It has also to do with the changing attitudes towards success that have accompanied the widening inequalities. Those who've landed on top have come to believe that their success is their own doing, the measure of their merit, and that they therefore deserve the full bounty that the market bestows upon them, and by implication, that those who struggle, those left behind, must deserve their fate too. Now, this way of thinking about success arises from a seemingly attractive ideal, the principle of meritocracy, the principle that says, insofar as chances are equal, the winners deserve their winnings. Now, we know that in practice, chances are not truly equal. Children born to low-income families tend to stay poor as adults. For all we hear about the American dream of upward mobility, the chance to rise, not to be consigned to the fate of one's birth, it remains the case that someone born in the bottom 20% of the income scale has about a 1 in 12 chance of rising to the top 20%. That's not terrific. That's not what we normally think about when we think about the promise of the American dream of upward mobility. In fact, we've told ourselves over the years, we Americans have told ourselves, a somewhat comforting story about the relatively high levels of inequality of income and wealth in this country. We've told ourselves we don't need to worry so much about inequality because here in America, it's always possible to rise, unlike those old world countries in Europe that are riven by class. We've thought of mobility as an alternative to greater equality. But today, it turns out that story has it backwards. Because it turns out that countries with the greatest mobility are the countries with the greatest degree of economic equality. A study was done comparing OECD countries, looking at their rates of intergenerational mobility and asking the following question. How many generations would it take for someone born poor to rise not to the top, but to the median income in their society? There are some countries where it can happen pretty quickly. In Denmark, for example, it takes just 2 generations to rise from a low income family to the middle. 2 generations. How many generations would you guess it takes in the United States? Just call it out if you have a guess. What would you say? 5? 8? 12? 20? In Vermont, they guess high on this question, which is already kind of revealing and interesting. It's 5 generations, compared to 2 in Denmark, from which you could conclude that the American dream is alive and well and living in Copenhagen. But we could conclude, looking at the fact that we don't live up to the meritocratic principles we profess, that that's the problem. That's the problem, in which case the answer, the solution, is straightforward, if challenging. The answer is simply to work harder at bringing about truly fair equality of opportunity, so that everyone begins the race not only at the same starting line, but with the same background advantages. So to use the image of the race, true equality of opportunity, fair equality of opportunity, would not just be starting at the same line, but having had access, everyone, to the best equipment, the best running shoes, the best coaches, the best practice fields, the best nutrition. And then the race is run. Fair equality of opportunity. Now here's my first question for you, and we're going to have a discussion here if you're willing. We have microphones for the audience. Where are people who are carrying we've got 3. Like, if you could spread out, thank you. Now, here's the first question. How many would say that if we could bring about truly fair equality of opportunity, then we would be able to say that the winners deserved their winnings? How many would say yes? If we could perfect the meritocracy, then the winners would deserve their winnings. How many would say yes? Put up your hand. And how many would say no? So there's a mixed opinion in the room. Let's hear first from someone who says no. Even in that case, the winners would not deserve their winnings. Why not? If everyone really begins with genuine equality of opportunity. Who has an answer? Why do you say? Why not? Yes. And tell us your name.
Hi, my name's Will.
Will.
Nice to meet you. I would say there's just so much random chance involved. Like to put this back in the race metaphor, let's say we're not racing on a track here. We're racing on a bunch of rocks, and people can trip. There can be a random stone that's in the path. There's plenty of stuff that people luck into. There's plenty of times that you might get a job just because you happen to be in the right elevator with the right person. And
Yes.
as a result, you can say that you quote unquote deserved it, but at the end of the day, I don't think that anybody really deserved it. I think that it's luck predominantly, and as a result, we just shouldn't have the race in the first place.
We shouldn't think of society as a race,
Yeah.
you're saying, Will.
If you think of it as winners and losers, there's going to be a winner and a loser.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
Right. And so Will says, no, even with perfect equality of opportunity, there would still be luck, there would still be chance. The best runner might trip on an uneven thing in the racetrack, and that would be luck. bad luck in his or her case. So who has a reply? Of those who say that with perfectly fair equality of opportunity, a perfect meritocracy would be one where the winners deserve their winnings, what would you say? Who has a reply to Will? What would be your reason for saying that? We need a defender here of you can perfect the meritocracy. Why would that not result in the winners deserving? And what's your name?
My name's Elliot, and I would reply saying if you're gonna consider the factor, like the discounting factor of luck, and honor that, you would have to acknowledge and recognize its like arbitrariness and how it's inconclusive and thus randomly applied to everyone and everything, which I mean brings you back to a pretty level and like even state at that point.
So if you emphasize luck, Elliot, you're essentially saying that who gets ahead, who does well, is morally arbitrary?
It wouldn't be a basis of unfairness.
Yeah.
If you and I and the guy to my left would have the same level of luck applied.
So if everyone had the same luck.
Well, if you can't really quantify, or you're not going to be able to you can't state luck's different here or there. If we're like you said, we're on if everyone's starting from the same thing, even
right,
then luck's going to be less applicable.
Okay. If everyone really starts from the same starting point with the same background advantages, maybe luck, Elliot says, doesn't enter into it at all. Who else thinks? Well, here's a way we can test it with let's try a concrete example. And here, let's move from the actual race to earning, to income, to how much money people make. Let's compare. Well, let's begin with your best high school teacher. Most everybody still remembers even the name of their most inspiring teacher in high school. Does everybody here remember? Yes? What was the name of yours? Yeah. What?
Dr. Thomas.
And yours? Brian?
Mr.
What
Brian.
did he teach?
He taught English.
English. All right. Now, everybody has such a teacher. I can remember mine from high school, Miss O'Brien. She was very tough. She was a conservative, tough woman who taught European history. A wonderful teacher. Now, how much do you think your best high school teacher got paid? $50,000 for Dr. All right, in today's dollars, $50,000 for Dr. Bryant, for Mr. Bryant. Yes. Is that about right? I suppose it depends where, when it what yours? Probably 40,000. All right, 40,000, 50,000, maybe in a well-off school district. It could be 75, 80,000 even. Now let's compare that pay to someone who makes loads of money, someone who's very, very successful. Take a star athlete. Who's the best played? Who's a lavishly remunerated athlete? LeBron James. What does he make in a year? He makes about what? 20 more. Yeah, it's I think it's around. Depends whether you count endorsements. But what? 100 million, something in that neighborhood. And now, would you say? Well, here's our next vote. If you're ready for this. Would you say that LeBron deserves to make, here I have to do the math quickly, how many times? 5,000 times more. No, it would be, if it's 50,000 for Mr. Bryant, then it would be,
Not zero.
it would be 1,000, is it 1,000 times more? Does LeBron James deserve to make 1,000 times more than your best high school teacher? How many say no, he doesn't? A lot of hands. How many say yes, he does? All right, keep your hands up. All right, we've got 4 or 5 brave people here. All right, tell us why. Tell us your name and tell us why. Yeah. Oh, go ahead, in the back. Yeah.
Thanks. Everyone in here.
Wait, what's your name?
Oh, I'm Charlie.
Charlie. Okay.
Everyone in here can name their best high school teacher who's presumably like really good at what they do.
Yeah.
But everyone has that person. But no one in here personally knows a basketball player that's as good at basketball as LeBron James. Like there's only one LeBron, but there's what, like 200 people in here? 150? And they all have really good high school teachers. I mean, there's a lot of good teachers in my high school.
Yes.
And they're all important and they're all valuable. I think they're underpaid for sure.
They're underpaid.
I'm not
So
defending
how
the pay
much-
of teachers.
If they were paid what they deserve, Charlie, what would they get paid?
$115,000 a year.
115,000. Okay, that's a generous and maybe a more appropriate pay for a teacher. 115. But then LeBron would still make maybe 950 times more,
Yeah.
and he would deserve it.
He is he's an exceptional talent. Like what he does cannot be replicated by anybody else. So in that sense, yes, I think he is. Well, maybe, I don't know. I don't want to give a number to him, but he's worth a lot more than a really talented high school teacher.
And the reason, Charlie, the reason he's worth a lot more, 950 times more, even than the well-paid teacher, is what exactly?
Because of how hard it is to find someone who can do what he does. Because of the rarity of his talent.
The rarity of his talent.
And it is worth to people. I mean, people pay lots of money to see him. People pay him millions of dollars so that he can
Right.
say that that people can say that he likes their product, whether or not he actually does.
Right.
He's worth that to people. Like people.
He's worth it. People are willing to pay. He has a rare talent. And we could take another example outside of the field of sports, entertainment. Charlie, what about, would you say the same of Taylor Swift?
Yes, I would say the
Makes
same. of
more
Taylor
than
Swift.
LeBron.
She makes a lot more than LeBron. Yeah.
And so you would say the same. She's got a rare talent, and people want to hear her sing.
People pay thousands of dollars to go see her in concert. People pay taxes to go see their high school teacher. And I didn't pay taxes. My parents pay taxes.
Right.
I pay about $50,000 to come here and see my professors because they're worth that to me.
Yeah.
Professor Zakaris up there, he's a very good professor.
One of your students. Yeah.
But, I mean, I'm not a Taylor Swift fan, but there are
You're not.
millions
So,
of people who
yeah.
would pay the amount of money that she charges for her concerts to go see her sing
Right.
and dance and play guitar and all that stuff.
All right. Who disagrees with Charlie and has a reply? Who disagrees? Go ahead. You disagree, but you didn't you put up your, all right, so do you mind telling us why? Okay.
My name is Bridget.
Bridget.
Yes, and I'm actually in the same class
Oh,
as
okay.
but I guess my main reply would just be that first of all, people have plenty of terrible high school teachers, a lot more than the good ones.
Right.
And so the teachers have an abundance of talent as well, and you can't say that they don't. And also, the teachers teach us everything we know today. You wouldn't be able to say the word LeBron James without going to school with those
Right.
teachers.
Yes. And so would you say, Bridget, that those teachers contribute something more valuable, more important than LeBron or than Taylor Swift?
Absolutely. I think education is worlds more powerful than sports or music.
And what conclusion would you draw from that, Bridget, in terms of what they deserve? Do you think that a school teacher therefore deserves to make more than a basketball player?
Yes. I think that basketball players don't provide anything that is necessary to our life and
Right.
worthwhile, whereas teachers do.
So Bridget is introducing a powerful principle here, if I understand you right. Tell me if I've got you right, Bridget, which is that what people really deserve depends on the moral importance of what they contribute. And the moral importance of teaching is greater than the moral importance of basketball or singing pop songs to a large audience like Taylor Swift does.
Correct, yeah.
Okay. Does everyone agree with Bridget, or are there some who disagree? Who disagrees? Yes, go ahead. We'll get you a microphone.
I probably don't need. I'm pretty good at projecting. But I'm Sam. I think that I would object to LeBron James being paid like hundreds of times more than the average school teacher. I don't think it's necessarily about the school teacher deserving more necessarily, but that it creates such a like significant amount of economic inequality that creates classes which will always end up like excluding a bunch of people. So I don't think it's up to us to say that somebody is deserving more pay. I think that's something that's determined by like social forces, not individuals. But I think it is up to us to say that like the disparity between those two people and between those two pays is unacceptable because it has certain, like what you were talking about before, in that like it creates this illusion that the people at the top deserve more. I think when you have such disparate inequality, you create that illusion.
So it's an illusion, Sam thinks, that those who land on top really do deserve more. Are you suggesting, Sam, that people who make a lot of money don't deserve it?
I think that people who make more money than others may deserve to have that difference to a certain extent, but I think that people who have like billions and billions and billions of dollars more than the average person who is contributing their fair share to like social cooperation, that's one, just like probably wrong because both of them are playing their parts in social cooperation, but also two, creates impacts that separate those people into almost different societies.
So you're saying, Sam, that too much inequality creates bad effects for a society, independent of this question that we've been wrestling with of who deserves what and why.
Yes.
And if we were to just linger for a moment on the question of who deserves what and why, taking account of Sam's independent point about there being bad effects of too much inequality, is there anyone else who disagrees with Bridget's idea that the school teacher contributes something of greater value and therefore deserves more than a basketball player? Yes, what do you think? You disagree with Bridget.
I just feel like
All right, let's get you a microphone. Go ahead. Right here. What's your name?
I'm Maddie.
Maddie.
I feel like it's very difficult to quantify and measure the moral importance of a contribution, right? Because potentially LeBron could inspire thousands of young boys to go and actualize their dreams in the same way that a teacher might, and it would be difficult to quantify the moral importance of either one of their contributions.
So that's an interesting point. How are we able, or can we, is it an impossible task to try to measure and compare, Bridget, the moral value of this or that contribution. So do you challenge Bridget's idea that what a teacher contributes is just more important, more of greater moral importance than what a basketball player contributes?
I am compelled by it. I just think we can definitely subject it to scrutiny and say that the basketball player could potentially inspire millions in a similar way that a teacher might to actualize their goals and beliefs.
And so are you suggesting that who deserves what shouldn't depend on our trying to figure out the hard question of whose contribution is of greater importance?
I think so, yes.
Does that mean we should just leave it to the market? How else should we decide who gets paid what?
I would probably get Kantian with it.
You would get Kantian with it. Okay. Well, I'm bracing myself. What would you say then?
That people are ends in themselves and that therefore we are all deserving of a base level of compensation for...
Right. Nobody should be left to starve.
Yeah.
But even if we concluded that and therefore had a robust safety net so that everyone had access to basic human needs, then how do we figure out who should get paid more than other people, the teacher or the basketball player?
I'm inclined to say that we should leave it up to the market, and that feels like a very arbitrary value system that I don't really want to ascribe myself to, but I don't know if I can see another way out of this question.
Wow, okay. All right. So Maddie acknowledges a certain puzzlement in dealing with that question. And sometimes acknowledging that kind of puzzlement or dilemma puts us on an important path in philosophy. So we've identified through this discussion, we've defined a hard but interesting question about who deserves what and why, and how income and wealth should be distributed. Bridget's intuition is those who contribute the greatest value deserve to make the most, right? And Maddie says, well, given the examples we've been discussing, the teacher and the basketball player, that seems plausible, but doesn't this involve hard subjective judgments on which people will disagree how to value this or that contribution? And if given that difficulty, maybe we should make sure that everyone has access to basic human goods, basic human needs being fulfilled, and beyond that, let the market decide. But Maddie goes on, maybe the market's verdict is also morally arbitrary. And that's where she left us with this cliffhanger. Maybe the market's verdict on whose contributions matter most is morally arbitrary. Because why would it be morally arbitrary? I suppose the reason is it depends on the accident. This is back, Will got us going on this question of luck and accident. The accident of who happens to have the talents that are in demand at any given moment. And that's an accident, isn't it? And the further accident, or good luck, or morally arbitrary fact of what society happens to demand at any given moment. So let's go back to the LeBron example. It's certainly to LeBron's credit that he works out, that he practices, that he cultivates his talents. And there's no doubt that he does. But that he's gifted, unusually gifted as an athlete, that's not his doing, really. That's his good luck. And not only that, the fact that he lives in a place at a time when people love basketball, the thing he happens to be very good at, that too. Well, that's his good luck too, isn't it? It's not his doing. If he had lived back in the days of the Renaissance, he probably wouldn't be making $100 million because they weren't that interested in basketball back then. They cared more about fresco painters. So the discussion we've had suggests that the market's verdict on whose contributions are of greatest value may seem to be a kind of value neutral or default alternative to us thrashing about with different opinions about what's really more valuable. But as a basis for deciding who deserves what, it doesn't seem so good because the market's verdict reflects at least these two different sources of moral arbitrariness and luck. Having this or that talent and having that talent be in great demand. And this reminds me of a point that this is, I suppose, Charlie, a possible answer to your argument. It's true that LeBron has a very rare talent. But there are other people with equally rare talents who don't make $100 million. I mean, it's probably a rare talent to be able to balance on your nose a very long, narrow stick with a peanut on top. That's a rare talent too, I imagine. But watching people do that is not in great demand, and so that rare talent doesn't get lavished with great rewards. And would we say that's an injustice? Well, probably not. Or take the best arm wrestler in the world. Now, the best arm wrestler may attract a few fans at the local pub, but, and that arm wrestler may have as rare a talent as LeBron's, but nobody much cares about watching arm wrestling or balancing the pole with the peanut on one's nose or whatever it may be. So that, I think, is the moral force of Maggie's, well, we won't say Maddie's point, but Maddie's puzzlement. Now, so here are two possible objections. And before I go on, I want to thank everyone who's joined in this discussion and helped clarify this and give shape. What you've done, you've really given shape to this debate which underlies the debate about meritocracy, who deserves what and why. Now, we've identified two powerful moral objections to the idea that even a perfect meritocracy would not be one that would lead the winners to deserve their winnings. The moral arbitrariness of having this or that talent and of having that talent be in big demand. But there's a further objection to even a perfectly realized meritocracy. And that further objection goes beyond questions of distributive justice, what's fair. The further objection is that meritocracy, despite its appeal, has a dark side. The dark side is that meritocracy, even a perfectly realized one, is corrosive of the common good. And the reason it's corrosive of the common good is that it tends to generate hubris among the winners and humiliation among those who lose out. It leads the successful to believe that their success is their own doing. Everyone else had an equal chance as me, and I landed on top. That increases our tendency to view our success as our own doing. The race was fair, the winners can tell themselves. And so if those who lose out believe the race is fair, there's something galling, something humiliating about losing a fair race. If you lose an unfair race, you can always make a complaint about the injustice, about the unfairness. But if you believe the meritocracy is perfect, that there is genuinely fair equality of opportunity, then the winners are likely to inhale too deeply of their own success, to forget the luck and good fortune that helped them on their way, to forget their indebtedness to those who make their achievements possible. Now, this objection to meritocracy, that it's corrosive of the common good, that it cultivates these attitudes, harsh attitudes toward success, toward winning and losing. This is the objection to meritocracy that the person who coined the term worried about. Michael Young was a British sociologist. He was affiliated with the Labour Party in Britain. He wrote a book in the late 1950s called The Rise of the Meritocracy. And it's the first time the term meritocracy came into general use. But for Michael Young, meritocracy did not name an aspiration or an ideal of a good society. It pointed to a danger. Now, he was writing it in the post-World War II era, when in Britain, finally, at least some working-class kids had an opportunity to go to good schools and to compete for good jobs. And that was a good thing. More fair equality of opportunity, breaking down the class system. And Michael Young welcomed that. He was part of the Labour Party, social democrat. But he worried that eventually, as the meritocracy came to be more and more fully realized, it would have this effect on the way people thought not only about the success, but also about themselves, whether they landed on top or on the bottom. And yet, successor generations in Britain, in the United States, and around the world came to embrace the term meritocracy, Michael Young's term, without his moral cautionary note. And in fact, he predicted that these attitudes towards success eventually would lead to a populist revolt against the meritocracy. He said it would come in 2034. He was right, except that revolt arrived 18 years ahead of schedule. Because this third objection to meritocracy, about its corrosive effects on attitudes toward success and the social ties, the corruption of social ties and fellow feeling and mutual responsibility. This begins to shed light, or so it seems to me, on our current political condition. This brings us back to the question with which we began. Why are we so deeply polarized? And what it has something to do with the widening inequalities of the age of globalization, with stagnant wages in real terms. There were very considerable gains from the version of globalization, the neoliberal globalization that was propounded and enacted in the 1980s and 90s and 2000s. In the United States, most of the gains, the economic gains of that period, went to the top 20%, and virtually none went to the bottom half of the country. Real wages of the median worker were flat, were stagnant for 5 decades during this period of widening inequalities, of the outsourcing of jobs, of the hollowing out of industrial communities, especially in the Midwest. And yet, even as globalization brought widening inequality of income and wealth, its proponents, Democrats and Republicans alike, offered, in response to the worry about inequality, they offered some bracing advice. They told us, if you want to compete and win in the global economy, go to college. What you earn will depend on what you learn. You can make it if you try. In fact, mainstream Democratic and Republican presidents and politicians, candidates for office, intoned this slogan. I call it the rhetoric of rising. You can make it if you try. Go get a degree. Then you too will be able to benefit from the fruits of a high-tech, globalized age. They intoned it to the point of incantation, a kind of numbing incantation almost. And yet, what they missed was the insult implicit in this advice. The insult was this: if you're struggling in the new economy and you didn't go to college, your failure must be your fault. The problem is not with the economic policies we enacted, the outsourcing of jobs, the free trade agreements, the deregulation of the financial industry, the bailout of the banks when the deregulation didn't go so well. The problem is you didn't get a degree, as we urged you to. Individual upward mobility through higher education is the answer to inequality, they said. But this insult, well, here's another way of putting it. The rhetoric of rising was heard by many working people whose jobs were outsourced and whose communities were unraveled. It was heard, this rhetoric of rising, less as a promise than almost as a taunt. It was galling. And increasing portions of numbers of American working people felt that elites, credentialed elites, those who did get the degrees, were looking down on them, didn't respect the work they did. And to add insult to the injury of inequality, it turns out that getting a 4-year college degree, well, let me take one step back. Those of us who spend our time in the company of the credentialed can easily forget a simple fact. Most of our fellow citizens don't have a 4-year college degree. Over 60% do not. Only about 38% of Americans have a 4-year college degree. So it was folly to create an economy that sets as a necessary condition of dignified work and a decent life a 4-year degree that most people don't have. So it's no wonder that there was an angry backlash against this system. And by system, I mean the combined effect of the neoliberal globalization project that brought widening economic inequality and the meritocratic rationale for the growing inequality that created the divide between winners and losers. It's not surprising that there was a potent sense of grievance. And that grievance was tapped into by Donald Trump in the United States and by similar figures in European countries. This is not only an American phenomenon. So that today, those without college, the diploma divide has become one of the deepest divides in American politics and in the politics of many democratic societies. We saw it also in the vote for Brexit in Britain in 2016 when those who voted to leave the European Union, expressing this sense of grievance, were disproportionately those without university degrees, and those who voted to stay were those who had university degrees. And we see the similar shift, the flight of working people from center-left parties, the Democratic Party in the United States, the Labour Party in Britain, the Social Democratic parties in Germany and in France, and in the Netherlands. The shift away from those parties toward, and not toward the mainstream conservative parties who embraced the neoliberal globalization, but to the right-wing authoritarian populist parties. So if something like this diagnosis for the current polarization and divide is plausible, what should we do? Well, one thing we should do is to rethink the role of colleges and universities as the arbiters of opportunity. Encouraging people to go to college is a good thing. Don't misunderstand me. And broadening access for those who can't afford it is even better. But this is not a solution to inequality. We know it's not, because although we often assume, and the rhetoric of rising certainly assumes, that college is a potent engine for upward mobility, that's not really true. A team of economists led by Raj Chetty studied 1,800 American colleges and universities, some public, some private, some selective, some not selective. And they asked the following question: what percentage of students at these places arrive from low-income families, bottom 20%, and eventually rise to affluence as adults, top 20%? What do you think the percentage is? What would you guess? Just call it out. Call out a number. 10? Who else? Well, you have to wait.
Okay.
You've already read the book, probably.
No.
No, all right. All right. What's your name?
Dean.
Dean. All right. Before Dean audibly gives his guess. All right, we've got 10%. What are the other guesses? Less than 5. What do you think?
1 in 12, same as you said.
About 1 in 12, so that would be about 8%, roughly 8.5%. Okay, Dean.
I swear I didn't read the book.
And you're boasting about that? That's all right. No, that's all right. No, go ahead.
2.
2. It's 2%. It's 2%. Thank you for that. Only 2%. Now, this isn't because going to college doesn't help you get a good job and a good career. It's that there are so few students from low-income backgrounds in four-year institutions to begin with, so that higher education is like an elevator in a building that most people enter on the top floor. That's why it doesn't lift more than 2%. So we need to rethink the role of colleges and universities, because it's higher education that defines the merits and confers the credentials that a market-driven meritocratic society honors and rewards. We should focus less on arming people for a meritocratic tournament. And that's what for many kids, what the high school years have become, a kind of stress-strewn meritocratic tournament. And focus more on making life better for everyone who makes valuable contributions to our society through the work they do, the families they raise, the communities they serve, whether or not they have a college degree. And that means partly it's a matter of priorities, finance. On the federal level, we spend, as of a few years ago, about $164 billion helping people go to college. And compared to the amount we spend on vocational and technical training, $164 billion, to, well, Dean, do you have the answer to that too? It's about 1.1 billion, 164 to 1.1. So this suggests the devaluation of technical and vocational training, and therefore also reflects the tendency not to accord dignity and respect to the kind of work that is performed and on which we depend by those who do work that does not require a college degree. Now another thing we need to do is to put the dignity of work at the center of political discourse. And this means remembering that work is not only about making a living. It's also about contributing to the common good and winning honor and recognition, social esteem for doing so. One of my political heroes was Robert F. Kennedy. I don't mean the younger, I mean back when he ran in 1968 for president. He put it this way: fellowship, community, shared patriotism. These essential values do not come from just buying and consuming goods together. They come instead from dignified employment at decent pay, the kind of employment that enables us to say, I helped to build this country, I am a participant in its great public ventures. This civic sentiment is largely absent from our public life today. It's tempting to assume, and Maddie put us onto this assumption directly, it's tempting to assume that the money people make is the measure of their contribution to the common good. But this is a mistake for reasons we've discussed. Martin Luther King Jr. explained why. Shortly before he was assassinated, he went to speak to a group of sanitation workers in Memphis, Tennessee. And what he told them was this: he said, the person who picks up our garbage is, in the final analysis, as important, as significant as the physician. Because if he doesn't do his job, disease will be rampant. And then he added, all labor has dignity. Before I conclude, I want to say a final word about the American dream. Because it might seem that my suggestion that merit has become a kind of tyranny flies in the face of the American dream, understood as individual upward mobility through higher education. To contend with this worry, I went back and read the work of the person who coined the term, the American dream, a writer named James Truslow Adams. He wrote in the 1930s, in the midst of the Depression. And for him, the American dream was partly about the chance to rise, but not only that. It was also about what might be described as a broad democratic equality of condition. And central to equality of condition is not the idea that everyone must have the same income and wealth. It was, or even the idea that everyone must have a minimum safety net to prevent them from starving and going hungry and lacking shelter and health care. A broad democratic equality of condition requires that we live our civic life, our public life, in a way that brings people from different backgrounds, different walks of life, into contact with one another in the course of their everyday lives. And he gave this example of what he had in mind by the American dream. He offered the example of the U.S. Library of Congress, a symbol, he said, of what democracy can accomplish on its own behalf. It was a place of public learning that drew Americans from all walks of life. As one looks down on the general reading room, he wrote, one sees seats filled with silent readers, old and young, rich and poor, black and white, the executive and the laborer, the general and the private, the noted scholar and the schoolboy, all reading at their own library provided by their own democracy. Adams considered this scene to be what he called the perfect working out in a concrete example of the American dream. The means provided by the resources of the people themselves and a public intelligent enough to use them. And he said, if this example could be carried out across our national life, then the American dream would become an abiding reality. I think he was onto something. But that's a broader American dream than individual upward mobility. We don't have much equality of condition today. Public spaces that gather people together across class, race, ethnicity, and faith are few and far between. We live increasingly separate lives. That's one of the most corrosive effects of the economic inequality of recent decades. Those who are affluent and those who are of modest means increasingly live separate lives. We live and work and shop and play in different places. We send our kids to different schools. This isn't good for democracy, because democracy requires that people from different walks of life encounter one another, bump up against one another in the course of their everyday lives, because this is how we learn to negotiate and to abide our differences. And this is how we come to care for the common good. So my final suggestion of how we can combat the polarization that afflicts us is to rebuild the civic infrastructure of a shared democratic life. The meritocratic conviction that people deserve whatever riches the market bestows on their talents makes solidarity, makes community an almost impossible project. For why do the successful owe anything to the less advantaged members of society? The answer to this question depends on recognizing that for all our striving, we are not self-made and self-sufficient. Finding ourselves in a society that prizes the talents we happen to have, that's our good fortune, not our due. Reflecting on the role of luck in life, on our indebtedness, this can prompt a certain humility. The humility that inclines us to say, there, but for the accident of birth, or the grace of God, or for the mystery of fate, go I. That could be me. This spirit of humility is the civic virtue we need now. It could be the beginning of the way back from the harsh ethic of success that drives us apart. and perhaps managing somehow to inculcate this spirit of humility, this civic virtue, can point us beyond the tyranny of merit, beyond the polarization we encounter today, toward a less rancorous, more generous public life. Thank you all very much. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you. Thank you.
We have just a few minutes for questions, so if you have a question for Professor Sandell, raise your hand and we will, somebody who's carrying a mic will come find you. Do you want, let me, yeah, in the back there. Let's start there.
How do we, sorry, I'm Raghav. How do we allow for dignity in labor work as more and more technology replaces that work?
Well, what about technology? Is technology the enemy of the dignity of work? Some people say, yes, that's where we're headed. It's only going to get worse. I say this depends. There's a tendency to think and to predict that technology is coming for our jobs, that it's in the nature of AI and robotics to replace work, and that we had just better figure out how to adapt to a world in which work for a great many people is obsolete. And some have suggested that one way to prepare for that world is to give everyone a universal basic income so that they will have the ability to lead a decent life even without having any work to do. I think this would be a mistake, because what it misses, essentially, and this is often the spirit in which the universal basic income is proposed by those in Silicon Valley who are preparing the robots that will take the jobs. And for them, hearing it from them makes one wonder whether this isn't really a way of buying off popular resistance to the particular technologies that they are offering. The mistake in this assumption is to think that work is just a chore, just a burden, that people could live perfectly flourishing lives without. The reason I think that's a mistake is that what an economy really consists in, what it means, what an economy is for, is not just promoting access to consumption and consumer goods. What a political economy is for, is organizing a scheme of social cooperation and contribution that allocates not only money but also social recognition and esteem. So that's why it would be very difficult to buy our way out of the dignity of work. But there's also a flawed and hubristic, for Silicon Valley, notion of technology embedded in that proposal. It's the idea that technology and its direction and its purpose is fixed, as if by nature. And in the case of AI, it's to automate work and to replace jobs. But that's not the only purpose that AI and technology can serve. Maybe automation isn't the best purpose for technology to serve. The idea that we can bend the direction of technological innovation to serve worthy social, civic, and human purposes, that should be right at the center of our political debate, because we're at risk of making the same mistake about technology that we made about neoliberal globalization. When globalization was at high tide, its defenders said, globalization is like a force of nature. We can't hold it back. We can't change it. It's pointless to debate it. We just have to adapt. Go get a degree. That was the argument. We heard this in the 90s from Bill Clinton. Well, first we heard it from Margaret Thatcher, who's speaking about free markets, said, there is no alternative. That was her slogan. But it wasn't only Reagan and Thatcher. Bill Clinton said globalization is like wind and water. Facts of nature. Tony Blair, his counterpart in Britain, Prime Minister, said, there are those who say we should stop and debate globalization. We may as well debate whether autumn should follow summer. And we're making the same mistake of taking the direction, in that case it was the direction of the economy, as just given to be governed by technocrats and bankers, rather than debated by democratic citizens. And now that we've finally overcome that mistake, that hubristic account of an economy, we're in danger of making the same mistake about technology, assuming that its direction, the direction of innovation, is just fixed by nature to be determined by Silicon Valley venture capitalists, rather than debated by democratic citizens. So I think we need to reclaim the debate about what ends technology should serve, just as we are beginning to reclaim the debate about how to configure the global economy.
Let's take just one more question right over here.
I was wondering if you thought that, along with your ideas, somebody in high school that might not be as talented in in certain subjects should not be encouraged to continue their education as opposed to honing their own skills, and that would then put more value and qualifications on other skills? Or do you think that there's still a lot more importance on encouraging students to continue their education past very basic societal knowledge, like how to go to the grocery store and calculate those things?
I think we definitely should encourage people to develop their education beyond those quotidian skills about how to manage a household budget or something like that. And I think we should recognize and support as valid and important forms of learning, including community colleges, vocational and technical training, that are now kind of seen as a lesser thing than going to a four-year college or university. So I think we should reverse the steep hierarchy of prestige among those forms of learning. At the same time, I think that wherever and whatever young people study for their career, it's a mistake to think of forms of learning as only having a career or vocational purpose. The mission of higher education, what makes higher education higher, should not be the heights of its prestige factor or the size of the so-called college premium, the earnings differential between those who do and don't have a four-year degree. What makes higher education higher is at least its avowed purpose of cultivating in students the ability to reflect critically on fundamental questions that matter, including moral and civic questions, including not just how do I prepare for a career, but what mode of life, what set of ambitions are worthy of me and why. And so I think that we make a mistake. What we've done really is to sequester civic education and moral and political philosophy in the citadel of higher education, and then we conduct a tournament to see who will have access to that citadel. I think instead, and this goes back to the idea of a broad democratic equality of conditions, civic education need not only take place in ivy-strewn campuses. There is no reason why programs of moral and civic education, moral and political philosophy, can't take place in every setting where people prepare for the world of work, including not only community colleges and technical training centers, but in union halls, in congregations, in one of the most influential labor union, labor movement in the late 19th century was the Knights of Labor in the late 1800s. And among their demands, they demanded better pay, shorter working hours, safer working conditions. But among their demands were reading rooms in factories, so that on their breaks, working people could read about public affairs, educate and inform themselves, so they too could be effective citizens. And this is an example of a broad democratic equality of condition. There's no reason that courses and discussions of moral and political philosophy and the art of democratic public argument, no reason that these should be, that these can better be carried out by aspiring management consultants than by future nurses and plumbers and dental assistants and construction workers. And so that's what I mean by a broad democratic equality of condition, civic learning broadly diffused, not only concentrated in a handful of privileged places of higher learning.
Let's all thank Professor Sandell once more.